Now we begin our look at topic 1.5, labor, slavery, and the caste system in Spanish colonial society. New cities and new economic activities in the New World required a significant labor source, and the Spanish in particular established a system of labor to address their specific needs. By the 16th century, Spanish settlements in the New World stretched from South America to the southern portion of North America. As gold and silver from the New World flowed into the economy of Spain, they became a significant power to be reckoned with. Spanish nobility could purchase luxuries from abroad, from anywhere in the world. And Spanish royalty could negotiate favorable treaties, including marriage treaties, with numerous other countries. The Spanish established a system of social hierarchy where pure Spanish people had all of the power, and mixed races, or mestizos, or even Native Americans, had very little. The mestizos were the product of Spanish intermarriage with native women, creating an ethnically mixed group. As natives died or disappeared, labor on the plantations was increasingly provided by African slaves, who had some level of disease immunity due to the fact that they were an Old World peoples. And those slaves occupied the bottom position on this social hierarchy. Those slaves arrived in this Spanish colonial system, sold to the Spanish by the Portuguese, who had developed a trade network down the coast of Africa towards India prior to the Spanish sailing westward. Slave labor wasn't unknown in Africa or even in Europe. There was already a trade in human beings that existed within Europe, in which Europeans had enslaved each other. Some enslaved Africans had also reached Europe, the Middle East, and other parts of the world before the mid-15th century as a result of a trade that had long existed within Africa itself. The transatlantic slave trade began during the 15th century when Portugal and then others, for example the Dutch, expanded overseas, reaching Africa. The Portuguese first began to kidnap people from the west coast of Africa and take those in slavery back to Europe. But after the European discovery of the American continent, the demand for African labor grew as other sources of labor, both European and Native American, were found to be insufficient. The Spanish took those first African captives to the Americas from Europe as early as 1503, and by 1518, the first captives were shipped directly from Africa to the Americas. The majority of African captives were exported from the coast of West Africa, but many came from deep within the continent. Africa would be quite impoverished by its relationship with Europe, while the human and other resources that were taken from them contributed to the capitalist development and the growth of wealth in Europe and other parts of the world. Unlike earlier forms of slavery, even African-based slavery, those who were sold into what was increasingly called chattel slavery by the Portuguese and others were kept as slaves forever and across generations as well. They justified this system of labor, noting that Noah had condemned Canaan, the son of his son, to perpetual servitude, effectively creating a biblical justification. Many Europeans also held a belief that those from Africa were descendants of Canaan. This unequal relationship that was created as a consequence of enslavement of African peoples was further justified by the ideology of racism, the notion that African peoples were inferior to Europeans. In order to maintain this civilization that the Spanish were creating in the New World, the encomienda system would be established. By rewarding faithful officers with land grants and the control of the labor of the neighboring villages and Indian tribes, Spain hoped to be able to better cultivate its resources, which initially focused on the mining of gold and silver, while at the same time establishing a support system for its religious missions. Spain was able to acquire trade goods which could be dispersed throughout Europe. With the decline in mining, sugar became an important export for the Spanish, which grew extremely well in the tropical regions of the Caribbean, which in turn increased the wealth of those who controlled the vast farms and ranches, which of course came at the expense of the natives and the later African slaves who carried out the actual work. With the Native American population virtually wiped out by disease, it became necessary to import African slaves, who had already been exposed to the diseases of the Old World, to serve as replacements for native labor. And of course, those slaves were sold to the Spanish by the Portuguese.